Venus in the Blind Spot is the latest collection of Junji Ito's short stories available. Unfortunately, this one is a smaller collection, and honestly, it's a collection of quite a few weaker stories of his, but I'll get to those in a bit. I always go into these releases blind. I have read a majority of his stories online through fan translations, but I like to be surprised when I first get these over here in the West. So what you shouldn't expect from this collection are the bizarre and terrifying stories like Uzumaki or Gyo, or the more radical supernatural elements like you'd see in those Suichi shorts. I would say for the majority of these stories, they're all pretty much grounded in reality. I mean, there are a few exceptions. 3 stories are adaptations, and 1 story is a tribute to Kazuo Umezz, who I just talked about previously. So you really aren't getting a complete original collection. I know a lot of people love his more bizarre horror, but he does a great job as well with the subtle and the psychological type thrillers, and that's what a majority of these stories are. The first story is Billions Alone. Social outcast Michio recently reconnected with a friend from his past. At the same time, he gets drawn into numerous cases of bizarre murder, a serial killer who sews bodies together. It's the right amount of strangeness that works for Ito. There's some subliminal messaging, mind control, military involvement throughout this story. And it's one that doesn't fully explain everything, and well, it's sometimes better to figure out the endings for yourself. The Human Chair is the first of 2 adaptations of one of the absolutely best in horror and suspense, Edogawa Ranpo, and I seem to talk about him a lot on this channel. Unfortunately, Ito's take on Ranpo's story kind of disappoints. What I loved about the original is the absurd creepiness and weird sexual tension of it. The manic-like narration of a man who lives inside the chair of a woman he lusts over. It's such a disturbing and scary concept that just didn't need that Ito twist. I won't spoil it, but I wasn't a fan of the ending, especially since it's a story that Ito could have done just fine. Following is another Ranpo adaptation, An Unearthly Love. And despite The Human Chair being one of my favorite Ranpo stories, I felt that this adaptation was much better in its execution. It explores the perversions and dark secrets of people we are close to. What kind of strange secret do you have? Well, Ito explores that situation here with the husband and wife in an arranged marriage. Again, I won't spoil anything, but it's one of the best in this collection. Next is the main attraction, so to say, Venus in the Blind Spot. The concept was promising: UFOs, aliens, some weird club, madness, naivete, and parental control. The payoff makes you think, well, it could have been better, honestly. The horror in this story isn't some outer world creature, but rather humans. Mariko's innocence is detrimental, but no thanks to her controlling father and a horde of mindless men who all fight for her. It could have worked better, perhaps, if it was a little bit longer. I kinda wanted this story to go all out with the UFO theme, since that's never really explored in Ito's works. Lichen Woman, it's pretty good. Possession, alien invasion, you decide. This hideous woman, kind of like the fashion model, killing those she licks. It's the type of stuff you'd come to expect, reminiscent of his previous work, Lovesick Dead, and parts Jack the Ripper. Master Umezz and Me seems like it was just kind of thrown in there to fill up space, I suppose, but it's funny, the way he over-exaggerates his art and himself in his more comedic stories is great, kinda like the Cat Diaries. And if you watched my previous video, you can learn more about him and the influence he had on Ito. How Love Came to Professor Kurita is an adaptation of a Robert Hitchens short story. Its version makes changes to better fit with his Japanese audience. It's about a professor and a priest. Though the original expands upon the unlikely friendship between the two, this manga version does enough to convey a fondness. It's basically a ghost story, but could be a metaphor for something else. There's an odd bird that's sort of the ongoing torment for the professor. But what I like most is that though the two seem like complete opposites, they really have a lot of common beliefs, though through two totally different means. I mentioned how most of the stories in this collection have a more grounded sense of realism than other collections. Aside from the licking woman, this ghost story could be explained through perhaps a guilty conscience weighing on the minds of these two. The Enigma of Amigara Fault was previously in the Gyo manga. Not sure why it was added to this collection. I think because it's one of his more popular stories, and it's one of his better stories due to its commentary on society. An earthquake reveals an odd, naturally occurring mass of human-shaped holes. There isn't a real explanation of what these holes are, but it is known that going in them will kill you. Most visitors perhaps learned of these holes from the TV sensationalizing it, kind of brainwashing the viewers to go visit this area, as they're overcome with a strong sense of curiosity once they're there, leading them to their own suicide. Is this story speaking on the dangers of TV news? Is it a commentary on suicide? It makes you wonder. It ends with two silly, even shorter stories, and I don't really have much to say about either. The principal post is rather absurd, reminds me of an Edgar Allan Poe story. Keepsake is another very short one. I don't know, these are both kind of forgettable. The collection also includes colored scenes from Ito's adaptation of No Longer Human. It's kind of random, but it's nice. There's also a little poster included, so hang that beauty up. Do I recommend getting this collection? For $20, that's kind of cheap, and if you're an Ito fan, it's a no-brainer. If you're a physical collector, like me, you'll get it regardless. If you are purely a digital reader, or perhaps just a casual fan of his or horror in general, it's hard for me to recommend picking it up. Out of all the collections available over here, it's the weakest one for sure. That being said, even his weakest of manga available is miles better than any other modern horror you'll find. For fans trying to get into Junji Ito, I would start off with something obvious like Uzumaki. But if you want a short story collection, check out Fragments of Horror instead. There's a lot of great stories in that one. So for fun, let's list the stories from my least favorite to my favorite. Starting at the bottom is Keepsake and the Principal Post. Human Chair, for being a disappointing adaptation, I really expected more from Ito on this one. Venus in the Blind Spot, I didn't like that payoff. After those four, the rest are enjoyable. Licking Woman was next for me, Master Umezz and me just because it's kind of funny. Enigma of Amigara Fault, followed by Professor Kirita, Unearthly Love, and then Billions Alone.